between. And everyone, and welcome to this session on Introduction to Mobile Security. So this is an introductory session on how we can secure our mobile devices, which includes not just our mobile phones. It also includes tablets as well and other similar devices, which are basically mobile. So, starting with the presentation, we'll talk about certain current trends, just like my previous presentation. I'll just give you an overview of the kind of things that have been going on in the mobile security domain in the past few months. Um, so, I think we already talked about this last time, but we'll just go over this once again. This was about fake Arogya Setu applications and fake Arogya Setu APK files were being circulated to trick people into installing these into onto their mobile devices. Um, and then government had actually banned 59 applications which were deemed to be prejudicial to the security of the country in June. And later, we again banned 118 applications in a similar way. Main cause for this was that these applications were actually collecting a lot of data of Indian users, and then it was being stored on servers on in countries which are prejudicial, which were deemed prejudicial for our security. Then TikTok was flagged. TikTok was actually flagged for collecting a lot of user data, which had not declared it was collecting, and then all this data was actually used for user profiling and for serving targeted applications. So TikTok was also one of the applications which was banned by the government. Now, moving on to some basics, I'll talk about the permission model of Android. Similar permissions are there in the iOS side as well, but they are more structured when it comes to the Android domain. So I'll talk about the permissions on the Android side, and then similarly, we can like extrapolate towards iOS. So you might have seen a similar page where while trying to install any application on your mobile device, it shows you a list of all the permissions that the application is asking for. Permissions basically are is basically an access to a particular feature on your device. It could be your messages, your contacts, your call logs. So any of this feature, if a particular application wants to access, it is going to be declaring that while you're trying to install that application from the Google Play Store. So the only difference now from this particular screenshot is that certain permissions which could be used for dangerous purposes and which could be used for malicious purposes as such are not actually are not actually asked from the user in the initial phase itself. While you are running the application, it will ask you for permission to access your camera or your SMS or your contacts. It will not ask you for those permissions while installing it, although you can obviously see those permissions initially. So these are the different types of permissions. The first type is normal permissions. These are all the permissions which do not need access to your personal data. So personal data could be like your contacts, your call logs, and your location history, and all your messages. So all these things are actually personal data, and even your file systems. So anything that could be that has any kind of personal data is actually not part of these permissions. So these permissions are basically accessing the internet, figuring out your time zone. So all these permissions are very basic permissions and do not lead to any user privacy issues. So these permissions are automatically granted when you are trying to install this application. The application will obviously show you the list of these permissions, and when you click on that install button, you're basically agreeing to give all these permissions to the application. The main point about these permissions is that they cannot be revoked once you have given it to the application. So once you've given the internet permission, basically while installing the application itself, then it cannot be revoked. And most of the times it has been understood that these permissions are not actually required to be revoked by the user anyways, uh, because most of the application, if it is asking for the internet permission, it will not function itself without the internet permission. So moving on to the next permissions, this is basically the signature permissions. So signature permissions are those permissions which are not defined by Android, but actually are defined by a particular app developer. And so, for example, if you have a company which has multiple applications hosted on the Play Store, and you want one of those applications to access the data inside another application, in such a case, the first application where you want the data to be accessed will declare a particular permission, and the application which wants to access that data will ask you for permission for that for accessing that data. So once you grant that permission, then both these apps can actually talk to each other. So just to simplify it, you can think about Facebook and Instagram, for example. Both are owned by the same company, and if Instagram wants to sign into Facebook, uh, basically you can sign into your Instagram account via your Facebook account as well. So if in the Instagram application wants to use the Facebook login, then Instagram will actually ask for permission to access the data inside Facebook application. So once you grant that permission, then both these applications can talk to each other. The only catch here is that both of these applications should actually be signed by the same certificate. So every app developer has a certificate, and when the same app developer is actually signing two different applications, then it is understood by the Play Store that these two applications belong to the same developer. So only such applications which are signed by the same certificate can actually talk to each other in this way. Moving on to the next kind of permissions, which is dangerous permission. So dangerous permissions actually cover all those areas where your personal data could be there, including your call logs, your contacts, your location history, your messages, your file systems. So all these permissions could actually be misused by any application. These permissions are categorized as dangerous, and all these permissions actually need to be explicitly granted at runtime. So while you're running any application, you might have seen that most of these applications nowadays ask you for permission to access your cameras. So once you give that access while running the application, only then the application can actually start running the camera. Otherwise, it won't be allowed. So these permissions are need not be granted at install time. They need to be given access only at runtime whenever the application tries to access that particular feature. So nowadays you might have seen, if you have the latest version of Android and even iOS, you'll see that whenever you're trying to grant a particular permission to an application, there is an option to grant that permission only once, and there is another option to grant that permission only while the application is running, which means that the application will not be able to access that particular feature while it is running in the background. So only while you have that application running in front of you on the screen of the phone, only then that particular application will be able to access that particular permissions. So all these different segregations have been made only for these dangerous permissions, and the catch about these things is that they can actually be revoked. So you can actually go inside the settings page of your mobile, and inside that settings page you can actually find out that particular application, and you can see all the permissions that a particular application is actually accessing. So you can go inside that page and you can actually take back all those permissions from the application. Although in most cases, what will happen is that the application may stop functioning, but this particular feature was actually rolled out to make sure that any application is not accessing any superfluous permissions which are actually not required for the basic functionality. So moving on to the next permissions, next kind of permissions, which is special permissions. So these are highly sensitive permissions, and there are only two, I think, of this kind. One of them is called write settings. So there are certain applications which will ask you for permissions to change your settings. So which is a pretty sensitive thing to do, and any malicious application, if it is granted this permission, it can actually cause a lot of damage onto the device. So these permissions are very special in the sense that when an application actually requests for such a permission, you will not be shown a small dialog box where you can accept it. You will actually be taken onto the settings page, and it will explicitly give you a warning that these permissions can be misused. And there will be a small checkbox where you can actually enable, and then only the application will be able to access these settings. So you might have some of you who are using the Android OS, you might have installed applications called launchers on your device. So these applications basically are able to change the home screen itself of your device. So such applications need to change the settings, and that's why whenever you try to run any of these applications, they will give you this particular prompt that they are trying to access the settings of your device, and they need to be given that permission before they can actually start doing any of their functionality. So again, these permissions can be revoked by going into the settings page. And just some best practices to note about permissions. You should always check the permissions before installing any applications. So most of the times while installing nowadays, you'll see only basic permissions like accessing the internet or accessing your time zone or some basic permissions like that on the install page itself. If the app asks for further permissions during usage, it's always a best practice to deny unless you know that it is absolutely necessary. So for example, a lot of applications will ask you for accessing your messages to read the OTPs. But I think it's always a best practice to actually not give that SMS permission to any application, and instead just read out the OTP from the message and then manually punch the OTP inside whatever application you're using. So the reason why I'm saying this is that once a permission has been granted, you will never know when that application will actually be accessing your messages. So if you have granted the SMS permission, then you can assume that the application can access your SMS anytime that it wants to. And most of the times we have like tens of applications on our devices, and in most cases we don't even remember what all applications are actually accessing our SMSs. So it's a very small example. Similarly, it's always a best practice not to give your location permission to all random applications. To your Google Maps or your any other maps or any other maps application, you obviously need to give that permission, otherwise it will not work. But for other applications for which it is not absolutely necessary, it's best to actually avoid giving the location permission. Then you can then there are certain red flags which could be there. So if you go inside your settings page, you will be able to find out certain red flags. Basically, you might be able to see some third-party web browser which is trying to which has access to your camera, your contacts, and other permissions. Although simple web browser should not ideally be asking for such permissions in the first place. So you might have heard of an application called UC browser. It was very common, and it used to come bundled with a lot of mobile devices itself. So this particular application was also one of the applications which was banned by the government, and the reason for that was that it was a web browser, but it used to access all the permissions on the device. So then the last point on this slide is that you should check permissions that have already been granted. So just go inside your setting page and then just go through all the applications which are installed, and then all the permissions that all those applications are taking. So if you find any application which is accessing more permissions than it should ideally require according to its functionality, then you can simply go and disable those permissions. Or otherwise, if you don't need that application itself, you can simply uninstall those applications. So we are done with the permissions modules. I think we can take some questions if there are any. And if we want to have a break, we can have that as well. So there's a question from Ms. Neha Yadav, which is, does app have permission to share the data with other application? So if an app actually needs to share data with other application, then this particular application will actually declare a permission. It will not ask for a permission. For example, like I told you about Facebook and Instagram, the Facebook application will declare a permission to the Android OS that any other application which wants to access my data can actually access it via this particular permission. So Facebook, for example, will have a permission called uh, Facebook.access, Facebook.login, something of that sort. So if Facebook is declaring this permission, then Instagram can actually seek that permission inside its settings. And when you install that application, Instagram, and when you try to log in, then it will ask you for accessing the Facebook's data. So this is how it works. So if an application is giving out data, then it needs to declare a permission. And if an application is accessing data, then it needs to seek that permission from the user. So next question is how we can check about the permissions for installed apps in settings. So sir, you can simply go inside your settings page. There will be a section called applications. Inside that, all your applications will be listed. And when you click on any of those applications, there will be an option to see to look at the permissions. So you can go to that page and you can look at the permissions that have already been granted to any of the applications on your device. Then there is another question by Mr. Mayank Kumar. How can we modify the permissions? So you cannot actually modify the permissions. You can go and disable any of those permissions, or you can enable them, but there is no way to actually modify any permission. So Naresh sir, do we take a break right now?
Yes, sir. We will take a break. Naresh sir is also just gone out. We will take a
Okay.
break for 5 minutes and then continue, sir.
Sure, sure. Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much. I request the participants to please join us back in 5 minutes after a small break. Yeah, thank you, sir.
me again that there is no permission to change. There is no option to change the permissions. Should we uninstall and then reinstall them? So, sir, it's possible that you're using an older mobile device which does not have that feature yet. But in most versions of, I mean, the most recent versions of Android, they actually have that permission page over there. You can also go inside the settings page and then search for this permissions, and I think you'll again be able to look at the permissions and then revoke them. So that option is there in most of the recent mobile devices. So welcome back everybody, and just moving on quickly to the next slide, which is things to keep in mind. So again, these are certain best practices, and most of them you would probably already know, but we'll still just go over them just to make sure that everybody is on the same page. So the first thing is that we need to keep the operating system itself updated. So we talked about in my previous session, we discussed about vulnerabilities and how they are actually released by the manufacturers. So, for example, if there is a vulnerability in Android, then it will definitely be fixed in the next security patch update. So, and Google releases Android security patches once every month, and all the other manufacturers who are using the Android OS are actually supposed to follow suit, and they are also supposed to push these security updates regularly to devices. But most of the manufacturers who are using Android operating system are not able to comply, and there is always a certain delay that is associated with them. So it's best to choose mobile devices from manufacturers who are actually more prompt with pushing these updates onto the devices, because if there is a known vulnerability in the wild, then any attacker can actually utilize that vulnerability to compromise your device. So the quicker you get these updates, the better protected you are against these attacks. Then we should always keep our applications updated. So you might have seen that Google Play Store keeps giving you notifications that there are so many updates which are available. So it is always best to keep all the applications which are installed updated. And another small little best practice from my side is that you should only install applications which you absolutely need. So if there is one application which you have installed and you have not used for the past 6 months, then it is always better to take it away, remove it from your device, because it will always keep using that much memory. And again, if there is any vulnerability which is associated with that particular application, then obviously you can fall prey to that as well. So it's always good to uninstall applications, uninstall unused applications, and only the most necessary ones should actually stay on your mobile device. Then there are a lot of memory cleaners and battery optimizer applications which are available for Android. So personally, I believe that these cause more harm than any good on your device. And most of these applications actually take a lot of permissions on your device. They'll try to access your contacts, and since it is a memory cleaner, it will obviously have access to all your files and your entire file system. So there is a lot of damage which can potentially be caused if any of these applications is installed and the developer itself is not scrupulous and they are actually sharing a lot of user information. So it's best to keep these applications away from your device because they are not needed by the Android OS or by the iOS. I think no such applications are there, so we don't need to see this for that. Then some other best practices: always use an antivirus on your device, and do not to install applications from untrusted sources. So there is a particular setting inside the Android settings page which actually asks you for permission to install applications from untrusted sources. Untrusted sources means anything outside the Google Play Store. And if you're installing any APK file from the which has been downloaded from the internet, then the first time that you install it, Android will actually ask you for permission to install that APK file. So it is always best to keep that checkbox unchecked, and not to allow untrusted APK files to be installed on the device, because that is the source of most of the malware. That is how most of the malware actually propagates. It is through APK files only. And then you should not click on links which you have received inside unverified SMS or maybe WhatsApp messages as well. So we'll look at a case study in which one of these vectors were actually used through SMSs. APK files were actually circulated. We'll look at that case study, and then we'll talk about this in more detail. Then you should check which applications have permissions to access your location and your contacts and your file systems. Just go through that settings, and especially be very careful about these permissions, because these are the most important permissions on your device, and this is where your personal data is actually there. So none of the applications which are requiring all these permissions by their virtue of their functionality should actually be able to access these features. Then there are a lot of applications which actually ask you for a lot of permissions initially itself. Some of them are actually listed here, and I've striked them out specifically because two of them have actually been banned by the government: UC browser and Cam Scanner. And then Truecaller, which has not been banned, but personally I don't use this, and I have seen that it actually accesses a lot of permissions, and it actually takes access to your file system, to your contacts, to your call logs, even to your SMS messages. So it starts reading even your OTPs. So all these permissions are taken by Truecaller, but the risk is that it may be a scrupulous company, it may be a good company, but no company or system is actually 100% secure. So if Truecaller suffers a data breach, then all your data is gone. And that has actually been seen previously, that there was a breach in the Truecaller data. So this is a news report from 2019 May, which said that data leaked for 300 million Truecaller users. So this was reported last year by some security researcher who found all this data on the dark web, but it was never actually acknowledged by Truecaller. They never agreed to it. They said that this data is not does not belong to Truecaller. So this is a snapshot of the data which was found, and you can see that in the images column, you can see that there are a lot of images which have the link of Truecaller over there. So that is how I think the researcher was able to assume that this data actually belongs to Truecaller, but they did not agree. Then again, in 2020, 4.75 crore Indian Truecaller data on sale for 75,000. This was again reported by Cybele, and then again it was denied by Truecaller that this particular data does not belong to them. So it's a personal advice that we should actually stay away from such applications which give us a good functionality, but in turn they are taking a lot of data with them. So that is, we are now done with the presentations, and I'll just move on to the case studies. Before that, I'll just check if there are any questions in the chat box. So there are no questions yet. We'll move on to the case study, and then we can take questions towards the end if we want. So this is the first case study. This was an example of how phishing links were actually sent out via SMS messages, and you can see that the SMS short code, as it is called, VK Notify and then AD TeleOS. So these are some random bulk SMS short codes which were used, and a lot of these short codes actually look like the income tax department's short codes. So it would be like AD-ITREFL, which is actually one of the short codes used by the income tax departments, which was misused by the attackers to send out fraudulent SMSs like this, which would say that, dear so and so, your income tax department requires you to click on this link to submit a request for remittance of your unclaimed approved tax refund. So these were actually SMSs which were promising refund of income, a certain refund of income tax, and there would be a shortened URL which would be given inside the SMS, and when the user clicks on this particular shortened URL, the user will be taken to this kind of a phishing page. This is of the income tax department, and you can see that the link itself does not belong to the income tax department. It is some random website.com, and then such a page would be hosted, and when you actually select your bank from there, you will be taken to your specific bank's page, and on the bank's page you will be asked for your user ID and password, just like your actual bank's page. You can see that it is actually hosted on this random IP address, and it is not showing you the actual domain of the bank, because this is a fraudulent page. Then on the next page, it will ask you for all your confidential information. Once you have given it your login ID and password, it will ask you for your PAN card, your name, your address, and apart from that, your date of birth, your email address, Aadhaar card number, your debit card, credit card number, and your ATM pin, and all these details. So once the attacker actually has all these details, he can actually cause a lot of damage, and they can actually take out money from your bank accounts. The only missing link in this entire tale is that they need to have access to your OTPs, which are sent onto your device for accessing your bank accounts. And you can see that once you have filled out the application, this is the page which is shown to you, which says that in your income tax refund application is incomplete, and you need to install this particular certificate application on your mobile device, so that your mobile number can be verified. So once you get onto this page, an APK file will actually be downloaded onto your device, and it will have instructions on how to install that particular APK file by enabling that unknown sources permission. So you can see over here at the bottom, it says scroll down and check the unknown sources permission. So they are also giving you all the steps for installing this particular APK file. And so what we were actually able to do is we were able to take a dump of that particular website which was there, and we found this particular APK over there, team-mobile.apk. So this particular APK, once we found out, we were able to analyze this APK file by reverse engineering the code. And what we found out was that it seeks SMS permissions, and it seeks permissions of your contacts, of your call logs, and then it also asks you for permission to become the default SMS application. So it will replace the default messaging application, and it will start receiving all the SMSs, and it obviously starts reading all your messages. And once it receives any SMS which looks like an OTP, then it starts forwarding that SMS to the attacker's mobile number. So what happens after that is that it actually deletes the OTP message from the device. So you actually never even get to know that an OTP has been shared by your bank with you. So these are some of the screenshots from this application. You can see in the first screenshot that it looks like it has the logo of the income tax department, and the name is e_mobile. And when you open this application, it will ask you for permission to your contacts, call logs, and then it will ask you for permission to become the default SMS application. You can see that in the second screenshot. So use e_mobile instead of messaging as your SMS app. So once you grant all these permissions to this application, it will actually start doing all the malicious steps, and it will start forwarding your SMSs. So this is a snippet of the code of this particular application, which we were able to reverse engineer. And you can see it is asking for 3 permissions: send SMS, then get accounts, and read phone state. And then all these permissions, once they are granted, it will actually start forwarding the SMSs. So in this screenshot, you can actually see that this particular code, SMS manager dot send multi-part text message. So all these, there are different phone numbers which are there. All these are actually Indian mobile numbers of the attackers. And what we believe is that these different phone numbers were actually being used for sending out SMSs of different kinds. So for example, for sending out OTPs of Amazon, there would be one number. For sending out OTPs of Paytm, there would be one phone number. So they have different phone numbers for all different SMSs, and the attacker, once they actually have access to your login ID and password of your bank, and if you've installed this particular application, they actually get the third thing, which is the OTP, or as we call it, the second factor authentication. So they have the triad completed, and then they can log in and make transactions from your bank account. So that was the first case study, and I'll just go through the second case study also. This is a very short one, but the modus operandi was again the same. This was not through SMSs, but it was circulated through WhatsApp messages. So you can see that it is giving you an offer of a loan, of a low interest loan, which you can avail by clicking on a particular link. So different kinds of these messages were there. And once you click on that particular shortened URL, you will be taken to this particular website where it will give you different options, and then it will tell you that you can actually download an application from Google Play Store. When you click on this particular link, you will not be taken to the Google Play Store, but an APK file will actually be downloaded onto your machine. And once you install that particular APK, it will again ask for all the permissions on your device, and they can actually take all your data also. So these are some of the screenshots from this particular application. So it is showing you some text box which is asking you for permissions to access your camera, and then it will take you, once you agree to that, it will take you to this particular screen for logging in, and it will ask you for your mobile number, and it will send you an SMS which contains an OTP, and once you enter that, it will start asking you for all other informations. And obviously, since you have already given it the camera permission, and since you have given it other permissions, it is already able to access a lot of data on your mobile device. So this was a very recent one, and these are the list of the permissions which this particular application was taking. So you can see in this slide that it is accessing your camera, it is accessing your logs on your device, and it is accessing your contacts. It also has that particular sensitive setting called write settings. You can see that is the last setting which is there. So it is able to access all these permissions on your device, and obviously there will be no loan which will be granted to you, but all your data will actually be taken away. So that's it for the presentation from my side, and this is our email ID, incident@cert-in.org.in. If you receive any such application, or if you find anything suspicious over the web, or if you've been attacked, you can always send in an email, and we will always analyze, and certain will obviously guide you on how to take, what actions you can take in order to protect yourself. So that's it for the presentation. Now, Nareshji, if we have any questions, we can have them.
Yes, sir. Actually, here I'm